So, today, I'm going to start off by reading a few passages to introduce what we're talking about. Psalm 141, verse 3. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Why so serious, David? James answers, James 1:26. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Alright, so that gives you an example of what we're going to be talking about today. Can someone get to James 3, verses 1 through 11? Michelle, hit it. And while she's doing that, let me do You know what? No, let's do this now. So once you get that, go right on ahead.
Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are guided by very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among the members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water.
Alright, folks. So, obviously, we're going to be talking about the tongue today, more specifically speech in general. Speech is very powerful and essential. If you don't believe me, go see Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. Okay, speech is very powerful and essential to the human race, and we see that when God introduces different languages to the human race to get us to be disunified and stop building the tower. We're not going to visit that tonight, but this week and the next, and maybe the third one, depending on how chatty you guys are feeling, is what we're going to be talking about. So, let's see here. Today we're going to look at general restraint of speech. So we're going to be in Proverbs a lot. But how does that fit with things like the Great Commission or other instances where we are obligated to speak the truth? And also later we'll observe how the Bible often encourages gentle speech. But what about the example Jesus sets with the scribes and Pharisees? These are the dilemmas we are going to tackle. Alright, so these, let's see, for starters, we're not going to be talking too extensively about dishonesty. Okay, the reason being is I hope that should be a pretty obvious topic for you guys. If that is in contention why dishonesty is bad, you can visit Exodus 20. That is in the Ten Commandments. If it's still unclear, someone you trust that's, go see someone you trust that's not me, because you're beyond my help. But in seriousness, lying will be mentioned collaterally with some of the passages we mentioned, because it does go hand in hand with the tongue. So, if we have enough time at the end of this whole series, I'll put the age-old question up for discussion, which is it ever okay to lie? I'm sure that can go on infinitely as long as we want with discussion. But like I said, we're going to stay away from that for now. Alright? So within that, we're also going to move past the taking of oaths, because that really goes hand in hand with the concept of lying, because there's really nothing wrong with an oath unless you're breaking it. And we will read that passage. So can I get someone to read Matthew 5, 33 through 37? Okay, Michelle. Yes.
Again you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil.
Yeah. So like I said, that goes hand in hand with being dishonest. But the context behind Matthew 5 right here is the Pharisees had this thing where if you swore on like God or something, then you'd have to keep your promise. But if you swore on anything else, you didn't necessarily have to keep it. They had this weird thing, and that's what Jesus was talking to. He said, "Well, just don't let your yes be yes and let your no be no." So that's where that goes. Last note before we get started, the concepts we discussed here can be applied to other forms of communication as well, like written language and body language. So after this, don't come up to me and be like, yeah, I got really mad at this guy, but instead of yelling at him, I flipped him off. Okay, that's also bad speech, and we will cover that, alright? Or I wrote him an angry message, so, living the Jesus life over here. No. Alright, so, as I said, we'll try to focus mainly on 3 categories. So general restraint, that's going to be tonight. Next week, we're going to talk about when to speak, and then the week after is going to be abuse of speech. More or less in that order. I'm not sure which one I'm going to do next week yet. So, before we begin, second introduction is an introduction to Proverbs, since we're going to spend a lot of time in Proverbs. So, if you haven't already, turn there. Let's see. So, Proverbs generally is a book of generalities. Wrap that around your head. Okay, so Proverbs obviously is still an inspired book of God, and it's still good to follow, but the statements made in Proverbs are not necessarily promises or commands. Alright? Think about that for a second. So, there can be exceptions. Just wait. So, for example, it continuously says the righteous will prosper and the wicked will perish. Obviously, in our world, we have examples where that might not necessarily be the case. We see wicked people prospering all the time. Obviously, in a perfect world, which we'll see when we die in heaven and whatnot, and in hell, that will be the case. But these are generalities. So he's saying, generally, the righteous will prosper. Follow these principles, generally you will prosper. Gotcha? And this is, let's see here. I gotta read my notes. So sometimes, the reason this is the case is sometimes God's plan requires that general trends of the world be reversed. Alright, we see that with his miracles. So generally the Red Sea is one body of water unless the Israelites are trying to get a wheat. Right? So, not exactly the same thing, but again, don't get me wrong, some commandments are reflected in Proverbs. For example, they quite explicitly talk about adultery. There are no exceptions to adultery. How can I tell? Because that's a commandment elsewhere in the Bible. Alright? So that's why I said generally it's a book of generalities. Alright? Gotcha. Alright, so the bottom line, we need to be careful with how we interpret this book. Also, when it comes to speech, and what we're going to be talking about today, I can guarantee there will be endless what-if scenarios. That being said, we can get tripped up on what-if scenarios all day. So this lesson, since it's based mostly on Proverbs, is going to be generalities about speech, what it should look like in most cases. We can go over what-ifs afterwards if you want. Text me about it, that's fine. Alright? But if we go into what-ifs during the lesson, we will never get anywhere, which is fine. If you want to talk about it. If it's really bothering you, we can go into that. Let's see. Another note on Proverbs, it's a book of contrasting statements, not contradictions, contrasting statements. And so for this series especially, take note of the fool or the wicked one and how they contrast the wise or the righteous one and what happens to them. Alrighty? So, are you still in James?
Nope, because you told us to turn to Proverbs.
What's up?
Awesome, James 1:19. And then we are going to go left to right around the room. I'm going to sign you passages. Sarah, are you busy with notes, or are you good for passages?
Yes.
You're good? Okay, cool. Proverbs 17, 27 through 28. Let's see. Jessica, can I get you to do Proverbs 10, 18 through 21? James 1:19. And let's see, Katie, Can I get Proverbs 10, 18 through 21?
You just gave that to Jessica.
10, 8, and 10.
She's like, I'm with you.
10, 8, and 10?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just keep going. Michelle, Proverbs 12, 22 through 23. Abby, can I get you to get Proverbs 29, 11? Aaron, Proverbs 18, 2. And I don't know you.
My name is Steph.
Hello, Steph.
Hello.
She's awesome.
Awesome.
So far.
I'm going to give you an awesome passage. So, Proverbs 18, 13.
Awesome, thank you.
Let's see.
No,
I have just enough here.
Generally. Right. Just
Katie.
like Proverbs.
You guys busy?
Yeah, no.
Proverbs 13, 3 for you. And Proverbs 29, 20 for the legendary cream puff. Is that of a serious nature. So that's asking someone about their day, or if they liked a meal or not, is not really what we're talking about. Because a lot of the passages today are going to say, be careful with your speech or restrain yourself. This is not an attack on social people. This isn't extroverts versus introverts. There's nothing wrong with talking with a friend about their day or anything like that. Okay? There is something wrong with pushing chairs. No, just kidding. Yeah.
So none of this applies while we're driving, right?
Yeah, when I'm talking to
That's one of those what if questions. What if I'm driving?
I'll text it to you.
Yeah. If you guys are curious as to the answer, it sounds like Aaron has done extensive research on this. So you can ask Aaron about that after class. Thank you, Aaron. That'll teach him. Alright. Yeah, so again, this is not to say it is not supposed to be an attack on introverts and a rally cry to introverts. Alright. Let's see. Yeah, so how social you are isn't being discussed, although babbling is mentioned today, so we will talk about that a little bit. So what we are mainly considering is serious conversations or even debates between people. Alright, so James, 119.
Me.
Go for it.
So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God.
Right. So that's a good introduction to today's topic. Notice the idea is not only to restrain yourself from speaking, but also to listen. The third concept noted, being slow to anger, is also repeated in Proverbs 17, 27 through 28. Sarah.
He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent.
Right. So it mentions having a cool spirit. That's the same idea of being slow to anger. So this is to say, the point of this lesson isn't purely to say talk less. Alright? It's also important to think, it's more accurate to say think before you speak. So this includes knowledge, but it also includes attitude. Alright? There's a huge difference between rebuking in love and rebuking in anger. Alright? So, let's see here. That means before you answer someone seriously, don't just think, do I know what I'm talking about? If the answer is yes, cool, step one is complete. Also before answering, am I emotionally prepared for this? So even if you know exactly what you're talking about, if you're furious, probably not the best time to answer.
True.
Alright? Yeah? Yeah, 2 steps to this. Think before you speak, great saying. Here's another one. Alright? Alright, so on another note, my dad always told my brother and I when we were growing up, it's a similar phrasing, but it's a little funny. It says, better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. And that's, I looked it up, it's attributed to either Abraham Lincoln or Mark Twain. I'm not really sure where the origin is, if you care. So, there's that. Alright, Proverbs 10, 18 through 21. Jessica.
Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. In the multitude of words sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver, the heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of wisdom.
Alright. So the ESV says prudent when it says the wise man. So I was going to ask, what does prudent mean? But there you go, it means wise. I looked up the secular definition. It can mean careful, wise, or mindful of future events, so like what the consequences are. All right. So this passage reveals the main reason for restraining your speech. What is it? If you answer, you can start. Jessica, read it again.
The whole thing.
If you know what I'm talking about, you can just read that.
What's the question?
What is the main reason for restraining your speech? Sure.
Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but
To avoid sinning.
To avoid sinning! Good job!
Not to be a fool. Not to be a fool, that's what you
Also not be a fool, yes. If you read Proverbs, there's so many things you can do not to be a fool. Also many things you can do to avoid sin, I guess. But yes. Yeah, so in the ESV it says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking. Which I just think that's a cool word. So, yeah, that's why this is important. And if you think about it, how many sins are related to the tongue? There's lying, blasphemy, gossip, slander, heresy. The list is endless, and obviously we don't have very good control over what we say. So that is the main reason for restraining your speech. All right. Let's see. Yeah. So this is the first in this passage. This is the first main contrast we've seen so far. Remember when I talked about Proverbs, the introduction to it, I said there's going to be contrast between like the foolish man and the wise man.
Yeah.
This is the first passage we've looked at that has a main contrast. I'm not going to mention that every time because they're usually pretty self-explanatory. A fool does this is what happens to a fool. Wise man does this is what happens to a wise man.
Yeah.
But take note of this as we go through, is all I'm saying here. Because even though it's self-explanatory, pretty obvious, it is powerful nonetheless. Alright. Proverbs 10, 8, and 10. Oh, there she is. Okay. I was like, I lost something. Great. So just read those two verses. They're going to have something in common. Hopefully you guys will catch on.
The wise of heart will receive commands, but a babbling fool will be ruined. He who winks the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will be ruined.
Alright, what's the common phrase?
Babbling fool will be ruined.
Good job. So yeah, so that reinforces the last passage, Proverbs 10, 18 through 21. Fools or folly, as I mentioned earlier, are often the antagonist in Proverbs because Proverbs is all about wisdom. The opposite of being a wise person is being a foolish person. So a fool is just who you don't want to be. A wise person is who you want to be generally. Alright, so this is where babbling is mentioned. Like I said, we would talk about it a little bit. Babbling is a little unique in this discussion because it's not necessarily a serious conversation. Babbling literally is going on and on and on. Yeah, and so here's the thing. If babbling in itself was inherently a sin, then I would be sinning right now, Brandon would do it all the time, because we are speaking for an extended period of time. Babbling, if you want to know if you're babbling or not, think about what you're talking about and who you're talking to. If you're talking about yourself constantly, or you're not, or if the other person isn't putting any input into the conversation, if you're just talking about what you want to talk about and you're going on and on and on, probably babbling. That's a good indication. So, let's see here. These passages and the one we read before it have the foolish coming to calamity. It doesn't specify how, so you guys can consider how this might happen, and if we have time at the end, we can discuss how the foolish come to calamity by babbling. Alright, so that's going to be a discussion at the end here. Alright. By the way, as I'm going through, obviously I move pretty fast, and I like to talk fast because I'm nervous. But if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and just throw them out there. Alright? Cool. Alright, so Proverbs 12, 23 through 23. Is that Michelle?
Yep.
Alright.
Did you say 22?
Proverbs 12, 22 through 23.
Okay. It's just the verses before it were about the tongue too. So
Yes.
it's like,
So,
okay.
yeah, so this time...
Specifically 22 and 23. Got
Right.
it.
Yeah, because this time around we're just talking about restraint in general. The verses beforehand actually relate more to when we should use speech, like specific example of when we should use speech and when we should.
Okay.
Go for it.
Alright, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. The prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly.
There you go. And this is mirrored very closely in Proverbs 10, 13 through 14, if you guys want to look at that on your own time. But notice the difference in verbs here, conceal versus proclaim. So my question is to you guys, which one gets more attention? The comparison shows up again in Proverbs 29:11. Go ahead, Abby.
A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. I'm
Right.
not a wise man. I'm not a wise man. Put it all on the plate.
Yep. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. What is he getting at here? When loudly proclaiming anything, you indirectly draw attention to yourself in addition to what is being proclaimed and to what information you're trying to present. In this case, since the proclamation by the fool is empty, the outburst is purely self-motivated, right? If he's proclaiming folly, he's drawing attention to himself by making a loud example of himself, and the loud example has no value. So why is he doing it? To draw attention to himself, right? Let's see. Proverbs 21:24 says, "Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride." Arrogant pride. So that would be the reason for these outbursts. That's why, like I said earlier, speaking loudly so people can hear you, something Brandon does all the time, something I'm doing now, it's not inherently bad. It's your motivation behind it. So notice the fool proclaims his own spirit and folly, nothing of any value to others. And on that note, Proverbs 18:2.
A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion.
Again, his opinion. And he doesn't even care if he understands. He just likes drawing attention to himself and his opinion. Alright? So, like I said, proclaiming or speaking to be heard isn't inherently bad, so don't be confused by that. A good question to ask yourself is, whose benefit are you speaking for? So if you're speaking, like I said, purely for yourself, that's a good time to restrain. If you're speaking to help someone else understand something, or to teach someone, or just to uplift someone, how was your day? Yeah, whatever you want. If you're an extrovert, I'm sure you know all about that. Well, that's correct. What's another big reason to hold your tongue?
To bring glory to God instead of yourself.
Okay? Okay,
No.
last part of that.
Anybody? To
Not bringing glory to yourself.
Okay.
Humility. Close
There
enough.
we go.
Yeah. Right. So, a lot of people talk to bring pride to themselves, as is exemplified by this fool here in Proverbs. They are talking to bring attention to themselves and their opinion. When we looked at why, because of arrogant pride. So, the opposite of that, humility. So a good reason for holding your tongue is humility. Alright? Proverbs 18:13, was that Steph? Yeah, that one? Okay.
Yeah. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame.
There you go. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You don't have much to say about that, but it's often referenced, rarely demonstrated, but always a good reminder. Alright? Yeah. And you've probably heard this before. This includes answering in your head. You've heard the phrase, don't listen to respond, listen to understand. Yeah. So, is that it? Oh, I saw the hand.
Anonymous.
Yeah, there. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so that's, this is saying, verbally, don't respond until you've heard the other person, but hearing the other person has its own meaning. Any questions on that?
Wait, what did you just say that last part?
Hearing has more meaning besides in one ear out the other. Essentially, it has more weight than the surface value.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just didn't hear you, honestly. I'm sorry.
What are we talking about? Alright,
I didn't hear you good.
I'll talk louder. No, just kidding. Alright. So, let's see here. Yeah. Okay. Proverbs 13:3.
That's you.
He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide, his lips shall have destruction.
Pretty serious. Proverbs 21:20 from Brandon.
Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him.
Yeah. So, over and over again, we hear how the fool for speaking rashly, speaking out of turn, etc., will come to ruin. And then it says, you see a man who is hasty in words, there is more hope for a fool than for him. So Proverbs extensively talks about how the fool is going to meet calamity. And then it says, no matter how intelligent you are, if you are hasty in words, there is more hope for the guy that we've been bashing this whole time than for you. Alright, so again, very important. So now, that's all the material I have for you guys, so I'm going to open it up for that discussion question. Over and over again it says, the foolish will come to calamity because of their babbling or, talking a lot. How do you think this would come to pass? Why is talking a lot so dependent on your health, essentially? Not like, you know what I mean. Go for it, Michelle.
Beneficial for you. Anyway, I would say a big part of it is that you basically slowly kill relationships.
Okay.
So your friends, your family, the people around you, if you don't actually know how to communicate with them, make it a two-way street, then however strong the relationships start and however much effort the other person's putting in, you're slowly hacking at the root of it. And when you isolate yourself or become isolated from other people, then you're missing out on their input and the ways that God uses them to bless you, especially like for a believer. Cutting yourself off from that good communication within the body isolates you from the gifts that other people are supposed to be using in your life and the gifts you're supposed to be using in their life. And so it's just slowly destroying what God intended for you in your relationships.
Very good. Any other comments? Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say when you're not careful who you tell things to, and when you're telling somebody too much, you can cause them to sin by, if they're not somebody who knows no condemnation in Christ and you tell them too much, they can stumble because you're giving them too much information and that causes them to judge you. So it kind of goes hand in hand with Michelle's, but you just have to be really careful about your speech and what you tell certain people and who you can really trust to tell a lot about yourself.
I suppose I get what you're saying. Are you okay, Caleb? You got something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think to add on to that, it's more so also you need to be wise about what you say because it can result in disunity within the body.
Absolutely.
And that is sin. So.
Although, on a different note, that's what you said, like the condemnation.
No condemnation in Christ. I don't know. You're just not supposed to tell people too much to make them sin and fall and judge you. That's what I was saying.
So, don't cause a brother to stumble?
Yeah,
Kind
true.
of? Okay, yeah, I can see that. At the same time, if you're talking to an unbeliever, you shouldn't shy away from giving them the whole truth.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
I totally agree with that.
Okay, good. Just clarify.
I think more, if I can, Sam, I feel like you're saying that when you're maybe sharing a struggle with someone, be careful who you're sharing that with, because not everybody's in a place where they can actually help.
Right.
And some people are gonna not be in the right place where they're gonna not give grace where you need grace. They're gonna judge because they think they've got it figured out, but they're on their own journey with Jesus. So
She said it.
be careful in who you're trusting with, because we do, right? That's a biblical command, is to communicate and confess your sins to one another. But you need to be careful who you're where that person is in their own walk with Jesus.
Yeah, and that's also hard to tell because you can't judge another man's servant. So
Sure, it is.
It's
But
just drinking wine with water,
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Also, there's